right, everyone, we're going to get started. Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Klein, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's University-Based Child and Family Policy Consortium call. The topic of today's call is strategies for identifying and acting on opportunities for student engagement in policy issues. Now, before I turn things over to our call moderator, who is Jenni Owen from Duke University, I want to say a few words about the consortium and also about using the GoToWebinar platform. As many of you already know, the University-Based Child and Family Policy Consortium is a network of more than 35 university-based institutions, including centers, schools, departments, and programs that have an interest in child and family policy. We are organized around three main purposes. The first is to share the latest findings and strategies for conducting policy-relevant research and to facilitate collaboration across our member institutions. The second is to encourage cross-disciplinary undergraduate and graduate training to support the next generation of child and family policy researchers. And the third is to foster effective translation between research practice and policy audiences. The consortium is run in collaboration with the SRCD, or Society for Research and Child Development's Office for Policy and Communications, and we host a number of calls each year on a variety of topics. If you are interested in learning more about the consortium, having your institution join the consortium, or if you would like to join our email listserv yourself so that you can find out about all of our upcoming events, please see the information on this slide. I will also be sharing this slide at the end of the call, and I will also be sharing a copy of these slides to everyone who has registered via email. Another couple of words about GoToWebinar. All of the attendees are muted. So attendees, please use the chat box on your screen if you'd like to send in questions for our speakers. We've already received the questions you registered with, and we will be answering them as we go. And speakers, please remember to self-mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Everyone should be aware that today's call is being recorded, and after the call ends, I will be uploading it to SRCD's YouTube channel, and I'm going to share that link with you all so that you can share it with your colleagues and your friends. So now, Jenni Owen, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. As Hannah said, my name is Jenni Owen. I'm at the Center for Child and Family Policy and the Sanford School at Duke University, and we're excited to host this call and appreciate SRCD and the consortiums helping us to facilitate it. And this call came about just by a quick few words of background. A number of us, and I'm sure a number of you listening, have found that students at all levels are more and more interested in doing policy work, though a lot of them, and I know some of you are on the phone, may not know exactly what that means. And we've tried to come up with some ways to be sort of supportive and helpful to faculty and to students in figuring out what that means, what some of the options are, looking at what some of the challenges might be and overcoming those. And so that's what we want to focus on today. We're excited to have three sort of experts in this area, and then want to spend a lot of time, as much time as possible, opening it up for interaction with the panelists and questions from you. And as Hannah said, we've already got a handful of questions that we'll start with after they make their remarks. So the way we're going to handle this call is to have each of the panelists, Cynthia, Osborne, Sara, Langworthy, and Anna Colaner, say a few words about what this means to them and their institutions when we talk about student engagement and policy work. And then I'll have a couple of questions for the entire panel to reflect on, and then we'll turn it over to all of you. So before I introduce them, the things that they'll each speak to just to start is what does student engagement mean, look like, etc. at their institution. So whatever their role is, and they'll describe that, each of them will describe their roles for you. What is student engagement? What level of students are involved, sort of what counts, what doesn't, who gets to decide, and how do these sort of opportunities come about. And if student policy engagement is new, if you were asking this question, if it were new for my institution, what would you suggest I do to get started? So those are two things that from our sort of observations, pretty much any institution is interested in, even those who've been doing this for a while. So we'd like to get started with that in addition to their opening sort of reflections on what it means in their institution. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you, who we'll be hearing from. You see them on your slide, and then let them go in order of appearance on the slide. So Dr. Cynthia Osborne is Associate Professor and Director of the Child and Family Research Partnership at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin. Dr. Sara Langworthy is an Extension Educator at the Children, Youth, and Family Consortium at University of Minnesota Extension. And thankfully, we have a student, an engaged student on the phone, Anna Colaner, who's a Ph.D. candidate with the Department of Sociology at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I would also just add that each of these individuals and their institutions have been involved in a number of other ways with the consortium, either over many years or over, in recent sort of time. So they really have a good understanding for what the consortium's purpose is and what we're trying to accomplish, which is why we thought they'd be a particularly good fit for this call, in addition to their student engagement experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia to get us started about her role and how that role connects with the student policy engagement question that we're focusing on today.
Great.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so I'm really glad to be able to be a part of this panel. As Jenny said, I'm the director of what we call the Child and Family Research Partnership at the LBJ School at UT Austin. And what CFRP is a kind of research group that provides research and evaluation support and services to both our national, state, and community level partners. An example of some of our partners are the state's Health and Human Services Commission, the Texas Office of the Attorney General, their Child Support Division, their Department of Family and Protective Services, and so forth. So we currently have, we do a lot of funded work from the state and local partners. We have 12 funded projects currently. CFRP has a full-time staff of 10, but importantly, we hire between 10 and 15 GRAs, graduate research assistants, each year to really be full participants in this work. Our students at the LBJ School have other required opportunities to participate in policy research. So we have a first-year research practicum in which, as a class of 10 to 15 students, they work together with a client and produce an important piece of policy research. They also do internships. But this is somewhat different in that I like to work with students in the work that I do, because I really think that they bring kind of a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective. They're super bright. And I feel like as a academic that it's really my responsibility and my privilege to be able to prepare the next generation of folks who are going to do policy relevant research. And this is an opportunity for them to kind of extend the work that they're learning within their classes and really apply that to the real world. What our students, like I said, are engaged in kind of the full process of the research that we do. A lot of it is evaluation work. And I like to think of it broken up into kind of three buckets of folks who are interested in bringing in the information, the literature reviews, the survey development, the focus groups, all the data collection. The second bucket is those who are interested in data analysis, both qualitative and quantitative, but really helping us to shape what the findings are. And then I have a group who I call my storytellers, who are really good at writing, hosting blogs, doing infographics and such, and producing PowerPoints and all those sorts of important pieces. And so we work with students to identify kind of what their strengths are coming in, but then we also really encourage them to build their strengths in at least one of those additional areas. And we've also identified that our graduate students are more valuable to us and more valuable when they go on the job market if they have kind of a set of skills that involve at least rudimentary knowledge of how to use data or other sorts of data analytic tools, that they know how to build surveys and other sorts of things. So we kind of put them, we're developing a kind of training plan for all of our students so that they are really able to take on the work, things that they may not just learn in their classes. So I've kind of taken up a lot of time. I'm happy to come back to the, if we were new, how we would start it up, but I want to make sure that others have time to tell about how students are engaged in their work, if that's okay. I don't want to take too much time.
Sure. Well, why don't we, thanks, Cynthia. That was great. Why don't we have the other two sort of do what you just did and then circle back to this question of, how would you get started, just so everybody covers that as well.
Thanks.
This is Sara Langworthy, and as Jenny said, I'm with the University of Minnesota Extension Children, Youth, and Family Consortium. And the Children, Youth, and Family Consortium has been around for over 20 years now and has always had a mission of bridging research, practice, and policy. We recognize that great research is being done in universities, but it often isn't getting out into the communities who might benefit from it. And so a lot of our work has been centered around bridging those gaps. I wanted to share a little bit about some of our student engagement in a local effort that we're doing. More recently, we are partnered with an elementary school in East St. Paul to really work on building some healthy learning environments for children. So this school that we are working with they experience a lot of food scarcity. A lot of these kids are from immigrant communities that have experienced high levels of trauma. So there's a lot of challenges that the school is facing, but the school staff have been really fabulous and really want to make the lives of these kids better. And so we have been partnering with this school to bring some of the resources of the university to inform what we would sort of think of it as informing policy on a more local level. So we can obviously think about policy as state legislatures or state agencies, but we're also thinking of it as a framework for how do you enact local change. So we're thinking about the different environments in which these kids are living, specifically in the school environment, and what are the different levels at which we can work with the school to provide the best education and health outcomes for these kids. So this partnership has really grown over the last few years, and one of the things that has really been exciting is the level of student engagement that we've been able to have. So one of the pieces of the project, we're in the process of designing what we're calling a calming room or a comfort room for students who are having behavioral regulation issues in the classroom and need a space to kind of calm down. What we did is we ended up partnering with the College of Design here at the University of Minnesota, and 23 undergraduate students in the course of one of their classes went to Bruce Vento, the school we're partnering with, and did measurements of the space and came up with these really incredible designs. So we were really able to capitalize on the expertise and knowledge of these students in a very specific specialty that they were working in. And as a result of that, the school is going to be using some of the elements of those designs moving forward. We do have one paid graduate student who is sort of our wrangler of all project details and is helping us with making sure we have all the partners at the table and all of those sorts of things. More recently, we've brought on 2 communications interns. So these are students at the university who are focused on strategic communications. That's their focus and their major, and so they're going to come and help us think about how to talk about this project and how to share the great work that's being done at the school. And we also have a student whose specialty is research and evaluation, who's going to be really helping to support the evaluation efforts of this project. So we don't always specify student involvement as being people who are interested in child and family policy necessarily. So this is a particular example of a broader array of student expertise that we're really capitalizing on and using. A lot of these students are not paid, but some of them are doing it for credits. Others are just doing it for internship hours. A lot of departments we've found do require certain levels of numbers of hours or community involvement, those sorts of things. And so it's a really great match for a project like this to have people from other departments other than our sort of standard traditional child and family policy departments come in and share their expertise and yet get a really great experience working out in community and learning some of the ins and outs of how school policy works and those particular pieces. So I'll leave it there for now and pass it on to Anna, I believe, who's going to share next.
So my name is Colaner. As you see, I'm a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm working on my dissertation there. I've also been a research assistant for faculty who are joint appointed in sociology and the Institute for Government and Public Affairs, doing policy relevant research there. And of course, my dissertation is attempting to be focused on policy relevant issues as well. So I have that angle. A lot of my comments, I think, today are also come from another role that I have, which is not on the slide, but I am currently the Data and Outcomes Manager in the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development. The position is funded by the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant. And one of my buckets of work in this position is to help develop and think through how to develop research, policy, and practice partnerships, not only with students, but with faculty as well. So our office is more generally, our role is to coordinate among various state agencies. So some of my comments, like I said today, will be focused on coming from that perspective of my work and kind of insights that I've been able to glean working with state agencies. And in that vein, when I think of policy, I usually kind of think of the state agency perspective, program administrative perspective, less so legislative kind of policy, but so there's that caveat. But so some of the ways that we have attempted to engage students in some policy issues, like I said, part of my role is to help think through better ways to engage with students and faculty. So we're always kind of trying to develop that and work through, like I said, better and bigger ways to do that. But we have written letters of support for students who are seeking fellowships and grants for research, usually dissertation grants and fellowships. We've also helped students who come to us with their faculty member perhaps seeking access to state data or other resources. So for example, somebody might need a list of principals, contact information so they could send out a survey for their dissertation, things like that. And then as a student myself and then other student colleagues that I have who have also been engaging with the state in various ways, we've kind of had to be a little proactive and try to engage with the state by, writing research briefs and sharing that with state agency folks in a, kind of a digestible, easy to access format, giving brown bag talks, things like that. So like I said, we're always looking for and thinking through other ways to engage with students. That's what we've been up to thus far. So I think we'll turn it back to you, Jenni, to go through the next set of questions.
Great, thank you all. I just have a couple of follow-up questions to help people get a full, sort of a more complete picture of what you sort of do and don't do. And then we'll have a couple of questions for all of you and turn it over to the audience questions that we've received. So one question is, can you just each sort of briefly recap or say, if you haven't already, what settings you include in your sort of characterization of student engagement and policy? So Anna, you spoke a little bit about thinking about it more in terms of more or less in terms of state executive branch. I know others think about it in terms of interacting with elected officials. Sara, you talked about community engagement in the school districts. So what settings are you including or have you included in your student engagement work? And then related to that, how would you distinguish the policy work from other student engagement, right? So I'm sure everyone on the phone, whether they're a student or faculty member or something else, can give examples of student work at their institutions. And since we're talking specifically about policy, what's different about that type of work? So I can repeat those questions if that was too much at once. And Cynthia, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. I think I understood your questions. I think they're really important. So the majority of work that we do in terms of the settings is working with our state agencies. We also have some community organizations that are implementing federally funded programs or state-funded programs. So I'll give you an example of kind of one of the projects that we're doing is helping the state of Texas determine how it takes this federally funded home visiting programs to scale in such a large state. So we are evaluating through both an implementation and outcome study and kind of how the state is doing this across 20 different counties and 31 different programs. And so the setting really is kind of at all levels, right? We're in the community, we're talking with folks, we're talking with the mothers who are the recipients, the home visitors who are delivering it, the agencies that are implementing it, and then we work closely at the state level as well. And so the policy is kind of, we also are paying attention, obviously, in coordinating with all the federal folks because they're the funders of this. So the setting is at different levels. But I think one of the bigger points to that question, which I heard some of the other folks making really important points on, is that what is policy relevant and what matters varies quite a bit, and it's not just that we're affecting change at the state legislature. I would say what I feel in that project alone, one of our biggest findings or most policy relevant things for the state is that we actually help them to think through their data collection system and their metrics so that we can determine whether anything is actually working or not. And so they change policies and procedures about how they're going and what they're going to collect. And so, and then we've done other things that have affected laws, and those are, different ways of affecting policy. But I think that what makes something policy relevant is at the end of the day, there are people who need this information to make decisions about it that's going to affect the public. That would be the way that I would describe it.
This is Sara. Cynthia, I would just echo what you said, what you shared at the end there. I would really agree with that broad definition of policy. There are policies within our universities that if we informed in some way, shape, or form, I would consider that an act of changing a policy for the benefit of somebody in question. So in terms of the Children, Youth, and Family Consortium's work, we have had over the past 20 years, we've had a pretty heavy focus on policy within Minnesota, and that has included working with state legislators, and at that level, we used to do family impact seminars, so bringing research and practice to legislators about policy relevant issues that they were going to be making decisions about in a particular session. And we've also done some research about how to communicate information effectively to policymakers. So we've definitely worked at that level and in those settings. But our more recent work has really focused on some of we sort of jokingly call it small p policy concerns, and those may have to do with, towns or cities or rural partnerships or school boards or whoever. But again, that definition that Cynthia shared about what are the things that the university can bring to bear on something that will change a policy or a rule or regulation for the benefit of children and families. As far as the student engagement piece of this, I think what makes it policy specific when I think about this partnership that we have with the school, we're not doing as much of, we're not doing traditional policy analysis, we're not doing traditional policy research in the way that a lot of people conceptualize it, but I do believe there's a lot of value in introducing students to the real world of how do you navigate some of these issues in order to make the best decisions for kids and families in your school district, for example. So we're within the context of this project, we're working at a number of different levels or settings. So we're working directly with the principal and the school staff. We have been in conversations with members of the school board, with a lot of project partners from across the community, so some that provide mental health services, other University of Minnesota departments, and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of different sort of contextual factors that students are learning about as they're infusing their expertise about design or about communications. And I think the communications one is especially interesting to me because the whole point of having a communications intern is to share the good work that's being done so that it can be spread, so that other schools and other districts may look at this work that we're doing as a model for how to change their own practices and policies. So in that way, these communications interns are doing policy work in a particular way. And so I think even just the exposure to these kinds of opportunities and conversations can be really beneficial for students.
Great, thanks, Sara. Anna?
Sure, yeah, this is Anna. I think that's an important question that you raised, Jenni, and like as I mentioned, when I think of policy, just because of my position here in the governor's office, I usually am thinking of state agency level, program administrative level. And our executive director, Teresa Hawley of our office, always talks about how we want policy at the state level to be research-driven, to be data-driven, and without getting too much ahead of ourselves and thinking about the challenges, there are a number of challenges to making research translate directly to policy, timeline issues, that kind of thing. I won't get ahead of myself here, but I think I just kind of want to make the point, I guess, that I think before I took this position, I kind of thought of policy-relevant research as research that could speak directly to policy, and I think that's, now that I've continued reading, I think other folks have written about this issue, like Vivian Sang has written about this issue, and others have as well, that's just one way of thinking about policy-relevant research, right? There's another issue, kind of another way to think about it that I have appreciated as I've continued reading is thinking about helping folks who deal with policy, and not just at the state level either, right? There are folks doing policy work, like our advocacy organizations, for example. I think of them as not policymakers, but they're engaged in policy work, and partnering with them even, and bringing to the table just a researcher's mind, if that makes sense. I think there's value in being able to just frame things in certain ways. That itself is helpful. It doesn't necessarily have to be, here's this policy problem X and here's a proposed solution based on my research. It can be more general than that and a little bit more nuanced. I don't know if that addresses your immediate question, Jenni, but some thoughts I had about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the last thing I would ask, and then I promise we will turn it over to the audience questions, is putting ourselves in the position of both a student and a student or a faculty member. If it's a student who is trying to figure out how to get engaged in this work and is having some challenges at his or her institution or just doesn't know where to start, what would you recommend? And likewise, if it's a faculty member who sort of likes the idea but hasn't had a lot of experience in this, again, doesn't know where to start, what would you recommend? So let's run through that question again for each of you, if you don't mind, maybe starting with Anna as a student, and then we'll move over to the questions that you've sent us already.
Sure. So I do have a number of kind of things that I've thought through in response to this question. And I think kind of initial steps might differ based on, if you are somebody who comes to policy research having a kind of an already preformed, clear research agenda or goals, versus if you are coming kind of willing to have policy issues shape your research agenda. I think the latter is probably more palatable to policymakers, and I might suggest that probably positions you a little bit better for engagement with policy issues, at least with the type of policy that I think of when I think of policy. So just kind of some concrete things that I might suggest. I guess I'm orienting a lot of these comments to students themselves, but I think some of this does apply to faculty as well. The first thing is to think, to go and figure out what grants, and many of you are probably already doing this, but get to know what grants, what work is already underway. Again, because I work at the state level, I kind of think of it at the state level, but what grants might the state have what projects are they working on? Go read the grant proposals to figure out what kind of things that they have proposed. So for example, if they have a Department of Education, federal grant, right? Those are all online. They're available to be read by anyone. You might also identify if the state has started a research agenda. some states, as part of the Early Learning Challenge grant work, I know have been encouraged by the feds to start developing a research agenda that would inform their data system development that many of the states are working on as part of that grant. So some states are already kind of thinking through research agendas, so identify if there is one and think about ways you can connect with it. I think a big one, like I kind of alluded to earlier, is connect with advocacy organizations if there are any. You know, it doesn't have to be to connect directly with a state or local agency, right? But you can connect with the advocacy organizations. A lot of them have already been engaging in a lot of work with state agencies and city agencies, and so they may be a really good resource for you. This is perhaps a little bit of an odd statement, but leverage your role as a student. In some conversations that I've had with folks thinking about research agenda, there's kind of that notion of like students as tabula rasa, and I think folks are more comfortable with the idea of students knowing that students have a research path in front of them, and I have heard folks kind of be interested in the idea of working with students because they feel like there's more potential for kind of shaping their research agenda and to kind of directing it a little bit, versus a faculty member who there may be a feeling that the faculty member already has a research agenda and they're already going to do what they want to do, and it's going to be hard to work with them. So leverage that kind of that image of the student. I think ideally, just again from my state perspective, try to identify like what heavy, especially if you're thinking about kind of a research partner for the state. If there are projects going on, try to find the heavy lifts that could be done within your scope, within the scope that you have as a student. So, for example, if you're working on a dissertation or you're trying to come up with a dissertation idea, we know that states, this kind of relates to some of the questions that I know some folks have about qualitative research, but the states obviously have quantitative data that they collect. The usability of them is a different story, but right, I think there's room for qualitative projects, for example, that can flesh out some questions that could be answered really easily by folks with quantitative data. So again, think about the heavy lift that you can do that kind of would attach on to some work that the state already might be thinking about. Perhaps I should have said this at the beginning, but I think it's helpful to come to your policy partner with some proposals, some ideas, some like kind of one-pager ideas of maybe research that you might be helpful on, but be open to being flexible. Again, I'm not going to jump ahead of myself, but one of the other challenges I see that we face with working with students and other faculty members as research partners is there's not a lot of bandwidth among government agencies. Staff are low and budgets are tightening. So you want to be able to pick projects and pick a scope of work that doesn't require a lot of bandwidth among of the agencies themselves, if that makes sense. So I'm going to turn it back to the next person.
Great, and I would say, Sara and Cynthia, feel free to add to that. You don't feel pressure to add to that, but if there are things you want to speak to that Anna didn't, that would be great.
Yeah, this is Sara. I'll just add that I actually landed my current role because during my graduate career I expressed a lot of interest in being a part of policy work and a research translation and working in community and that sort of thing. So I would just say, let it be known that you're interested. So if you're a student who's really thinking that the research track is not exclusively for you, that that's not where you want to end up, make it known in a way that feels safe and comfortable to you, and that reach out to those people who you sense would be supportive of that career trajectory. Really, I think taking opportunities that present themselves to you, even if they don't seem directly related, if you have the capacity to do that, if you have the capacity to volunteer your time and sort of extend your networks that way, and that leads to my main point, which is that this is really all about building relationships, whether you're a faculty member or a student. if you're looking at getting into those worlds, you need to start building those relationships, and whether that's contacting people and saying, hey, I'd love to have coffee and talk about your work, or whether that's volunteering some of your time, even just doing some hunting around online and gathering information about different organizations and areas that you might be interested in exploring. But building those relationships is really key.
Yeah, Sara, I agree. I was going to say the same thing, that if people are really interested in getting involved, especially faculty members, you know, meeting your local partners is really the first step. Going to their events, going to their meetings, asking to meet them for coffee. I've been able to build some long-term partnerships with folks in the state, and they will have needs that come up. Most of their grants are required to have evaluation components for them. They launch new initiatives and they want to know that they work. And it's true for all local organizations that are funding things now, as evidence-based policymaking is just really coming to the fore. Everyone wants to be able to answer the question, does it work? And that's where folks, especially policy schools, are really in a nice spot to be able to help them answer those questions. But it really starts with the relationships. But I also want to just add a little bit to the faculty about, it really does take a commitment to wanting to do work that makes some difference in policy or the lives of people, because the rewards are not necessarily aligned in the academy, you know, for this work. If I'm being totally honest, I could be much more successful in the academy if I just sat and, you know, looked at my secondary data and wrote a lot more peer-reviewed articles. Collecting data, taking time working with stakeholders, analyzing the data that you collect, translating it in lots of different platforms, all of that takes a lot of time and energy. Not to mention managing students and staff takes a lot of your time as well. And those are not things that go necessarily into your reward structure. So you do it because you care and because you really want to make a difference, and you think, you know, that it's important, but you don't do it because you want to get promoted quickly. And I wouldn't recommend junior faculty to do it very much at all, to be perfectly honest, or at least have a very, very straight talk with your dean about how it will be rewarded or not. I also think it's important that if you can build these long-term partnerships and you know that you're going to be able to fund students, that from a faculty and dean's perspective, that you really start to think about how to include that as part of your recruitment and funding for students who are coming in. You know, it's an opportunity for students, and they see it as a great advantage that they're going to be able to do things that are really relevant at your program. And so to really attach that to both the kind of recruitment and funding. I think it's also just kind of a final point from a faculty's perspective, and this is for both deans and faculty, to really think through that this work, that from when you're doing it within the academy, it is a partnership, and you have a responsibility to answer the research questions that your partners have asked you to or paid you to, that are going to affect their decision making, that are going to affect their performance measures, and so forth. So that is a responsibility, and you have a contract that says that. But part of that partnership is that they understand that you are also an academic who has a responsibility to advance the field of knowledge. And so whereas you may do work that really moves forward the questions that they need answered, you need to also simultaneously think about how it's going to advance the field more broadly. And that's slightly different than if they were to just go and hire a contractor to do this work for them. And so, you know, to kind of position yourself within that partnership, that you're not just taking work that they say, do this, do that, but that you're really building in an opportunity to advance the field. So I'll stop there. I can share some of my challenges if we get to that, but those are my final points.
Great, thank you all. And I think in your responses to the questions we've had so far, we've actually hit on some of the questions we've received from others, including the challenges, how to engage my students as a future faculty member, which I think you've hit on a little bit. And just now, Cynthia, I think you hit some on another question that we received, which is about whether current policies shape the research that you pursue. or do you conduct research as a way to influence policy? So I'd like to start with that one, since I think each of your responses have gotten into the possibilities for engaging my own students, as somebody asked. So if you could each, and these are now questions from the audience, so thank you all for submitting these ahead of time, and we've got some coming in now. So the question is, again, do current policies shape the research that you pursue, or do you conduct research as a way to influence policy? And I would ask, if you can, I know you all have so much to share, but I'd love to get to as many questions as we can from people, so maybe a brief response to that, and you don't all need to respond to every question, but please do if you've got something to add. So I will open it up to the three of you to respond to that first question.
This is Sara. I'll keep it brief. Yes, both and.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Cynthia. I would say yes and no. I mean, I have a lane in which I travel, and my research is, about children and families. But I wouldn't kind of branch out of that too far. It just wouldn't be me. But I am open to understanding whether the research that I would be doing anyway could be altered just slightly so that it's relevant to policymakers, that I know their language, I know their performance measures, I know what drives them. And, it just, the way that you shape your research just slightly can make a big difference if you sit down and understand each other. So I wouldn't, start a whole new lane, but certainly I want them to inform whether I can be relevant.
This is Anna. I just, again, from the kind of state administrative perspective, yeah, I think both and, but the first, I think from the state perspective, using policy to shape your research is probably the type of partnerships that might be easier for your policy partner to work with you on, if that makes sense. It's a little easier to say, we have this problem, can you do this, rather than looking for research to influence a particular policy.
And I think one of the themes that's coming up here in a lot of your remarks is the sort of question of matching. So somehow doing the best job you can do of matching your research agenda, if you have an agenda, or and the policy partners, whether that's at the state, local level, elected, legislative branch, executive branch, community partner, figuring out a way to match your research agenda or a portion of it with policy partners' sort of needs and their agenda, which is often one of the real challenges in terms of the timing and the manner of speaking and the dissemination process. But that's one of the things that I think you're highlighting.
Yeah.
Another question that has come in that may also be brief, but I think very helpful to those on the line, is to say a little bit more about whether you provide different opportunities to students at different levels, so undergrad, master's, doctoral students, et cetera, and whether, this is a little bit more complicated, whether there should be different training at different levels. I think that second part may be slightly more complicated, but I think, because I think depending on the institution where you're based, there may not be training in the traditional sense for policy relevant work of the sort that we're discussing. So that would be interesting for people to hear about.
This is Cynthia. I'll just say briefly, the majority of the students that work with me are master's students because at the LBJ School produces primarily masters in public affairs, although we do have doctoral students from both econ and policy, human development, sociology. And the type of work that they do is very similar, but sometimes the skill level that they have or their research interests vary, and so I try to partner those. My doctoral students, they need to be publishing papers, so they need to make sure that they know how to analyze the data and write things up. They need publications, so I'm going to focus on that with them. Whereas my master's students, they need to make sure they know how to direct a project and manage it and bring in data and so forth. And so I'm going to work with them more on those skills. So I don't work a lot with undergrads. We have some who are kind of interns, but not as much here.
This is Sara. I think that, yes, the experience varies a little bit depending on the level of student. So here at the University of Minnesota, we obviously have undergraduates and graduates, master's, Ph.D. level. It really just varies. I think really what we're looking for is the qualities that the student has, because so much of our work is based in community and I would include policymakers as a community that we work with. We're really looking for people who are able to work respectfully with people and to be really authentic in the way that they approach these particular pieces of work. So, you know, asking policymakers or people on the school board or whatever, making sure that they have ways to ask questions that are really respectful of the knowledge that policymakers bring to the equation. And so figuring out how to capture the right kind of students is often not so much a matter of what degree do you have, but it's more about their own passion and interest and ability to engage with those communities in a way that really respects the voice and expertise of the community that we're working with, whether that's a policy community or whether that's a school. And so I think the different level of training for some of the jobs that we have students do, yeah, I think that there's a certain level of knowledge about whether it's, you know, child development or family policy or even just basic statistics. For some jobs that's the case, but really for what we're looking for, it's less about a particular level of training and more about their approach to the work in general.
Great, thanks, Sara. Not surprisingly, a couple people have asked about employment, and I'm guessing that the questions have to do with employment of students, you know, related to or involving policy relevant work. And so I'm going to ask two of the questions at the same time because they seem to complement each other. One of them is, please discuss qualitative researchers doing policy work. And so I suppose this could be about students once they graduate or faculty as qualitative researchers doing policy work. The second, which I think is complementary, is how do qualitative researchers get hired for policy relevant jobs? Do we need quantitative training? So if you could speak a little bit to the balance between the need for qualitative and quantitative training for policy relevant positions, that would be great. And I realize that you don't all have expertise in every single one of these aspects of the questions asked, so just speak to it as you wish.
This is Anna. I'll just quickly share that. Sorry, Anna. Sorry. I'll just quickly share that, you know, the state has contracted to with, you know, researchers, not always students, obviously, but to do evaluations that are qualitative in nature. It's certainly not. It's certainly helpful to have quantitative training, but there are really important questions that have to be answered qualitatively. So.
Yeah, this is Cynthia. I mean, I think if you want to get in the world of program evaluation, you're going to have to learn quantitative skills. There's just no way around that. You're not going to be able to make a lifetime out of it if you don't have it. I'll be perfectly honest. But you also cannot do program evaluation and be very helpful for policy if all you have is quantitative skills. That these mixed methods are so important that we have to help not just answer whether something works, but why and for whom and in what ways. And you know, those take going into the community and talking to people, both focus groups and interviews and observations. All of this is just so important, and sometimes a quote can, you know, influence a policymaker much more than a statistical significance. So I say that both are really important. But there is room for people with a wide variety of skills kind of within a research team. But while you're in school, that's kind of the only time in your life you're going to be able to learn quantitative skills. So learn them. That would be my motherly advice. Sorry, but that would be what I would tell my daughter.
This is Sara. I would just agree with what both Anna and Cynthia have shared, that it's important to have some of both. You know, to Cynthia's comment about working with policymakers, yes, quotes and qualitative anecdotes sometimes, or qualitative research will get you in the door and really get you into having a conversation with somebody about the relevance of the work, you know, or the applicability to policy much more quickly than charts and graphs sometimes will. But it really depends on the individual person, and so having both really allows you to be able to approach those conversations in different ways depending on who you're talking to and what your audience is.
This is Anne again. So I just want to reiterate an earlier point that I made that right, some state agencies, for example, often have their own data, and so it's not. So again, some of the value of doing partnerships with researchers is to rely on researchers to do things like qualitative research, right, where they can flesh out important questions that could be answered relatively easily with quantitative data, but we need people to actually be doing some of the qualitative pieces of that. So just wanted to add that too.
Great, thank you. One of the questions that I was going to ask you about challenges, I think dovetails nicely with another question that we received, which is about how do you compensate for low publications if engaged in policy work? So I think another way to ask that question is, do you have to compensate for low publications if engaged in policy work? And what are some of the, if that's a potential cost to this work, what are some of the other costs and how do you handle them? So if you could speak first to the question of publications and the possible sacrifice you make in that area, and then any other costs that you experience when you engage in this work. And Cynthia, I know you spoke to a couple of those earlier.
Yeah, I think what I mentioned earlier, I think stands. Your pace of publications, if you engage in a long-term evaluation project or that you're really working closely with an organization, your pace of publications is going to be slower perhaps than it would be. And if you were just using secondary data, also collecting your own data, raises issues of whether people believe your data and so forth. So there is a trade-off. It's something that you kind of personally have to either just be committed to pushing through. I mean, there's kind of a little bit of a pipeline issue that after a while things get in the pipeline and they start to come out faster, but it will slow you down, and that's why I don't recommend it for anyone prior to tenure, to be perfectly honest, well, at least supplement it with work that you don't have to be reliant on collecting your original data from, the real world from, because that can be really timely and ugly.
This is Sara. I think one of the things about this question that strikes me is that it presupposes that all graduate students are wanting to have a lot of publications to then become researchers in their own right. And I certainly recognize we probably have a lot of people on the call who are going that direction. But I also want to acknowledge that there are students who we work with who that's not their own goal. A lot of them would like to work in advocacy or in organizations, nonprofits, that sort of thing, especially when we're working with undergraduate students. And so for them, that's less of a concern. But I think just being upfront at the beginning of a conversation with a student and just to explain that, in this type of work, we don't have the kind of publication rate. So it's important for you to be keeping that work up in other areas if that's important to you. In terms of other costs, I think the biggest cost for us is time. Students are fabulous. We love having them. They have always worked well for us. But the biggest issue is the time it takes to bring people up to speed and to train them. The problem with students often is that obviously they graduate and they leave, which is wonderful, and that's what we want. But it also then means that we have to train new people more frequently than we would if we were just hiring a staff person. But I think that trade-off is well worth it, because the passion and the vibrance that students bring to the work is it's incredible. I'm constantly blown away by the things that our students do and the things that they care about and the work that they bring to really make our work better. And so I would always advocate for using students despite the costs, because it's just been fabulous.
Thanks, Sara. So I'd like to ask you each if you want, I know Hannah wants to say another word or two about the consortium and plans for the fall. So in our last minute or two before that, if any of you would like to add, if people leave with nothing else as far as guidance, what one or two pieces of guidance would you give them as they're thinking about pursuing this work, whether a student or faculty member?
This is Cynthia. I think from both the students and faculty's perspective, it's all about building relationships that you can sustain over a period of time, that you become an invaluable resource for them, and your partner becomes really an invaluable resource for you, that this is not a one-off sort of thing generally. that it is something that you build up over time, and you kind of provide more than just, you know, simple, did my program work or not?
This is Anna. I would just.
Thanks, Anna or Sarah.
That was Sarah, but
Sarah.
that's perfect. I would 100% echo that from the state perspective, that it is all about relationship and trust, and having a relationship where it is mutually beneficial. But I think that's the secret sauce to a good partnership.
This is Sarah. I think from a student perspective, keeping your options open and trying new things, because you never know where it's going to take you. You might volunteer a little bit of your time on a project, and that may be the thing that you want to do with the rest of your life. So being open to those opportunities, because I think even if you do end up pursuing a research career in a more traditional sense, those experiences really inform how you think about your work. And how you think about how your research really impacts and benefits children and families. And the last thing I'd say is just stay curious. Be curious about things and how they work and what's going to happen and those kinds of things. Being inquisitive, I think, is a skill that a lot of researchers have, and that can be applied to all kinds of settings.
Great. So huge thank you to Sara, Cynthia, and Anna for your time, your insight, your expertise, and sharing your perspectives on these. It's something, as I said at the beginning, that we hear, at least at the center where I am, and we hear more and more students and faculty trying to figure out how to make this work, both for the faculty, for the students, and obviously for the policy partners. So thanks again to all of you, and I will turn it back to Hannah to wrap up the call.
Great, thank you, Jenni. I would just like to echo that by saying thanks again to our moderator, Jenni, and our speakers and our attendees. To our attendees, if you enjoyed today's call, you may be interested in our future consortium calls. And while we are done for this academic year, we'll be picking it up again in the fall with the start of the new academic year. And the way to hear about those calls is to join our listserv. And again, up on the screen, I have the way to do that. And I will be following up this call with an email, which will include a link to today's slides, as well as a link to the YouTube of the recorded version of this call. And then lastly, I just want to say a word that our consortium coordinator, Sara Mancall, is having a baby today. So everybody should, you know, cross your fingers and get excited about there being a new consortium family member in the fall. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great day. And please contact me by email if you have any questions. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey, it's supposed to be that.